Good morning, everybody. Morning, everybody. Hey, Chris. Morning, Martin. Hey, Robert over on YouTube. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Liz on YouTube. Hey, Kelly and Karen. Hi, everybody.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid
Hey, Nancy.
and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Hey, Jan and Larry and Jolene. Hey, Lindsay. Hey, Jordana. Octavia. Hey, Renee. Good morning, Emily and Leah. Hey, all around. Hey, Pepperana. Hey, Maggie. Octavio. Good morning, Mom. Hey, Natalie. Hey, Amy. I announced this one kind of last second, decided this morning, hey, let's just actually list it and do the tour properly. This was generally my lowest selling tour. But I realized I haven't done it in a long time. I guess I did it on effing Chicago once. Because I had to go change out all of the overlays for a minute there. Hey, Renee, this is Benny Goodman live at the Congress Hotel back in 36. I thought I listed it. Actually, I think I sold more tickets to this, or got more pre-donations to it than I have on anything in a while. It's only been up for about an hour. Hey, Heather. Hey, Jean. Hey, Ann. Like Melville Fuller above. Yes. It's absolutely absurd that there is a school named after him in Bronzeville. Thanks, Renee. Thanks for sharing. Everybody who hits that share button, that really does help. Hey, Ava. Hey, Dina. Ava, I'm pretty sure it's morning. It was when I walked up to the park to see the turtles and walked past the famous clock house. I don't know how many people are around from the early days. I found this house where inside you can see all these clocks all set to 7:02. It just sounds like a setup for a middle grade novel or something. And then I couldn't find it again for a while. Hey, Rose. Morning, Kathy and Kathleen. Hey, Diane. Morning, Audrey and Cindy. Hey, David. Hey, Katie. Hey, Timberly. Good morning, Daryl. Hey, Chuck. Oh, hey, Kitty. It looks like, well, you know, I walked by the day. I thought it was 7:05 before. Now there seem to be set to 7:02. Maybe time is moving very, very slowly backwards in that house. Maybe it goes back one every year. Hey, Rosalinda. Hey, Christine. Hey, Gail. Walked by this morning. Walked over to see the turtles at the park. Walked back. How many steps did I get? About 6,000 steps.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Hey, Karen and Eric. Lisa Ronnie says she's getting a lot of messages from people asking if she's the one who won the lottery. Nobody asked me that. Which cat claimed the new chair this morning? That would be Miles. He's on the chair right now. We got a little storage table to go next to it to complete the room yesterday, but I haven't decided if I liked it yet. It kind of looks just like a garbage can. Oh yes, today is the day George Jetson is supposed to be born. And speaking of, I should see, I got a picture of Marina City in here. It is sometimes said that Marina City, designed by Bertrand Goldberg, inspired the look of the Jetsons' place. Well, let's move back over. And it is kind of the case, you know, the parking structures down below, you could, in fact, park a flying car in those things. There are even those who say that that was intentional, that it is supposed to be like that. I can't imagine that's really the case, but it's fun to imagine. I say I love you, dear. Part of the canon of the Flintstones Jetsons expanded universe. Oh, hey, Joanne. Well, hopefully whoever won it is going to keep a really low profile about it. Otherwise, they're going to be dealing with requests and beggars and, you know, just dealing with all the scam artists and con artists who are going to come after you. Hey, Gail. Hey, Toby. Relatives you didn't realize existed. A guy who showed up at Pullman's place right after he died. I swear I don't want any inheritance, but he's my father. Morning, Steve. Hey, Kathleen. Good morning, everybody.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Yeah, Mysterian gave me this for a tour a while ago. It may not read that well on these now that I look at it. Narrow stripes. Kind of creates optical illusions. Hey, Dad. Yes, George, we're pretty sure the kid was not your son. Yeah, I haven't played lottery in a long time. Now and then I'll buy a scratch-off ticket just because I like them, but I never win. Remember, it used to be in Iowa, the whole radio campaign was like people, oh my God, those are my numbers. But wait, I forgot to play. It's kind of a brilliant ad campaign, really. Kristen, that may be true, but you know who else had the same stupid beard and everything and looked exactly like Pullman? Everybody. There were several people I didn't put a picture of into the Graceland book because they all had that same mustache and the same outfit. Alright, should I switch into a shirt that reads a little better? Maybe I should do that. I don't want to distract people too much. So hang on a second.
And they all loved it. They all loved those fashions when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
All right, here we go. Hey, Susan. Good morning, everybody. All right, we're going to let Benny finish up one more tune, and then we'll get started properly. Welcome along. Anybody new today? I don't think I bought a lottery ticket in my adult life. I had a coworker once called it the math illiteracy tax. But, you know, it's no big sin to throw in a buck here or there. Hey, Cheryl. Morning, Ashley and Bill. Hey, everybody. Good morning all around. I decided to throw up a tour today. I last officially did this one on Mysterious Chicago almost 2 years ago. Hey, Patty. But it was about my lowest grossing tour of 2020. All right, we'll let Benny Goodman finish up this tune. Hey, David. All right, there's Benny finishing up. Well, Rebecca, as we'll see today, 'twas ever thus. All right, so, well, that's Benny Goodman wrapping up live at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago back in the mid-1930s. But all right, welcome along, everybody. Ooh, I've still got the overlay up from the last time I did this one, when it was an effing Chicago tour. All right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I have been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books, including one that I very rarely plug, because I wrote it in like a weekend, called Speaking Ill of the Dead, Jerks in Chicago History. You know what I should really be adding right now? Once again, this was, the last time I did this tour was like 2 years ago. So it definitely does not include, in my setup here, it doesn't have the Graceland book. The new Graceland Cemetery book, shipping now, officially available in about a week, but already shipping pre-orders, from University of Illinois Press, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. Today at 5 o'clock, I'll be on WGN Radio talking about it with Rick Kogan. Also on the show is the guy who directed a new movie called Roy's World, a documentary about a Chicago writer that was produced by my good friend Michael Glover Smith. So it's kind of a when worlds collide situation today over on the Rick Kogan show. How in the hell am I going to park for that show? It's right by Lollapalooza. It just kind of occurred to me right now. All right, such is the life of a cat. But anyway, I'm on TV and the radio all the time. I am, in fact, incredibly famous, and you definitely pay attention when I tell you that these guys were a bunch of jerks. Now, everybody knows that cemeteries are full of heroes and villains. Everybody from the mightiest king to the lowliest peasant dies eventually. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Today we're going to talk about a bit of the unjust. In fact, we are going to start with an ironically unjust guy. Well, it seems in a way ironic that a justice of the Supreme Court would have been an unjust kind of guy. Let's just go to Graceland Cemetery. There's a guy who turns up occasionally on the tours here. This is Melville Fuller, who was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in the late 19th century. Now, previously, the Chicago Tribune back in the 1860s, when he was just in the State House, had predicted his demise when he voted against spending for veterans of the Civil War just to humiliate the Lincoln administration. He really hated Abraham Lincoln, particularly the Emancipation Proclamation, which he thought was absolutely unconstitutional. It has been said that he was really against slavery in the abstract, and as a student even wrote essays about the evils of slavery, but also was one of those guys who who maybe didn't like slavery very much, but hated abolitionists more. Much of his entire persona at the time seemed to be based on hating abolitionists, and when the Civil War came up, he said it was really the abolitionists who started it. Slavery was already there. They shouldn't have been trying to stir things up. When a powder keg is blown up, who is to blame? The inert material or whoever lit the fuse? But not only did he end up not having his political career killed by voting against veteran benefits, but he went on to become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, ruling in such things like the Lone Wolf case, where he ruled that the United States government could break treaties with Native American tribes without notice because they were just Native Americans and didn't actually count as citizens or anything like that, and Congress did not have any obligations to treat them as human beings. More famously ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that separate but equal was totally constitutional. For the sheer amount of damage that it did, the sheer amount of laws that came into being, the sheer amount of inequality that became law of the land, it's very difficult for people to come up with a ruling that did more damage than Plessy versus Ferguson. Now, here's one of the things that I especially enjoy, though, is when he died, he happened to die on the same day that there was a Jack Johnson fight. Jack Johnson is buried not far away from him at Graceland Cemetery. But the fact that there was a big Jack Johnson fight was much bigger news at the time than a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court dying. At the time, people didn't think, it was a chance to change the whole complexion of the court and push somebody through. I'm pretty sure I got the picture here. There are quite a number of pictures, in fact. Let me see. I seem to have lost this one. Let me fix that up because it's one of my absolute favorites. So the next day, newspapers were much more into the fact that there had been a Johnson fight than the fact that Melville Fuller was dead now. So yeah, you get over off to the side, Justice Fuller is dead, and next to it, Jack Johnson going as though he's just thrilled that Johnson is dead. This turns up on quite a number of papers at the time. Here's another one. Justice Fuller dead. I get such a kick out of these. We'll move over in Graceland a little bit. Up in this section, up in the northwest corner of one of Johann Hawk's wives is buried right around here. There's also a guy by the name of William Drossel. Not a whole lot is really known about William Drossel. Can't show you a picture of him. He was a guy who accidentally died while trying to murder his wife. Oops. Now, something I've pointed out occasionally is, murder is not that complicated. This guy had tried to kill his wife a few times. Now, it's like pickpocketing takes some apprenticeship. You have to learn how to do that. Murder, it's kind of sobering to think of that anybody is really up to that. Just take heavy object, apply brute force. In his case, his idea was to shoot his wife and then himself, but didn't stop to think about whether he had actually shot his wife properly or just fired harmlessly into the wall, which was the case there. He left a note in a newspaper saying, "Bury me at Graceland." I was really kind of surprised that they actually did it, but he sure as hell doesn't have a marker or anything like that. So one of the gratifying things that a lot of the biggest jerks were aren't actually at unmarked graves, though some of them are. Here's a guy who would have been moved from the old city cemetery, though frankly there probably wouldn't have been much left to move at the time. Now, in the 1840s and 1850s, we had a lot of cases in Chicago where people were arrested on suspicion of being what were then called fugitive slaves. We would now call them refugees. Really, there are two cases. There are two kinds of cases like that in Chicago. There's kinds where the arresting officer's name is not known, and there are times when the arresting officer was a guy named Henry Rhines. As of 1840, he himself was about 30% of the police force, and over he would be arresting people that he thought were escaping from slavery, sometimes not even within his own jurisdiction, sometimes up in Wisconsin. As far away as New York, newspapers referred to this guy as a degraded, drunken wretch. Most of his rivals, most of his biggest enemies are coincidentally also buried at Graceland Cemetery. Now, later on, he went to jail himself. He got into an argument. He had arrested somebody and locked him up, then went to a bar that was run by one of that guy's friends, got into a fight with the bartender and shot him. then was put in jail. While he was in jail, the bartender died, which made it a murder case, but he somehow escaped from jail. He was eventually caught down in New Orleans and brought back to Chicago, but at that point, I can't figure out what happened. I haven't found any records or newspaper items about exactly what happened after that. I just know that it must have blown over, because a couple of years later, he was right back on his BS of assisting with fugitive cases. Then he died in 1852. That would have been a burial at the Old City Cemetery. He was probably moved over here, my guess would be probably about the time Minerva, his wife, died. It must have been before that. There wasn't really a burial among the family early in the Graceland days, so probably moved over here in the 1860s sometime, maybe 1870s. I'd have to check. His son, Henry Rhines Jr. and Volney Rhines were both noted billiard players later on. But in a kind of a similar topic, we'll hop over to Forest Home Cemetery here. There's still really a Graceland story, but the one of the principals, the jerk for the story, is buried over at Forest Home. There's a guy by the name of Officer Reuben Slayton. Now, Reuben Slayton, pictured here, looking all tough and a little bit satanic. His name rhymes with Satan. That's hard not to make any remarks about. But in 1867, he was working as a Chicago police officer when he went to raid a fortune-telling parlor on Van Buren Street in the Loop. When he raided the place, a guy by the name of Henry Harris jumped out of a window and started running. Now, Henry Harris had come to Chicago about 5 years before from North Carolina. Just statistically, as a black man from North Carolina in 1862, he was probably coming to town as what would have then been called a contraband. By 1867, he was free, but probably still understandably jumpy at the sight of police. He was not wanted for anything. He was not the proprietor of this fortune-telling parlor, just a visitor, but saw the police and ran. Slayton chased him down, beat the hell out of him, and he died that night. Newspapers the next day said that this brutal police officer had no more business being on the police force than a thief had being on the Supreme Court. They called for his dismissal. It did not end up actually happening. He got like a 1 week slap on the wrist or something like that. Later on, because 20 years later, he was still on the force and was one of the arresting officers in the Haymarket affair. This was the thing where there was a rally for the 8-hour workday after several workers at the McCormick plant had been involved in a shooting with the police, or the shooting with the Pinkertons. And following that, after a bomb went off, they just arrested everybody they could find, including speakers who hadn't actually been present at the time, but might have theoretically been involved in the planning. Slayton was one of the arresting officers. That was about the only other time he made the papers after this. But of course, all of that started in the McCormick plant. We could talk about Marshall Field a bit, too. He was a jerk, by all accounts. Nobody liked Marshall Field. And in fact, when Marshall Field needed money to buy out the partners and become the owner of the store early on, he went to the McCormick brothers, looking to get a loan of money. That alone does not speak well of him to me. Now, the Haymarket affair had been Cyrus McCormick Jr. by then. He was the one running the place. He was the one who sent in the troops. For now, we will focus a bit more on his dad, Cyrus. The three McCormick brothers, Cyrus, William, and Leander, came to Chicago in the 1850s, having invented, officially Cyrus was the inventor, though his brothers would always say that their father was the inventor, the mechanical reaper. Now, this absolutely did revolutionize farming. All of a sudden, people could gather in way more crops than they could before. And there are even those who say that this saved the Union. This freed up soldiers to leave their families and leave their farms and go fight for the Union later on. This absolutely revolutionized things. Now, there was even something they would talk about for years, the romance of the Reaper. In fact, they made a film about the romance of the Reaper showing Cyrus McCormick, who by all accounts was a completely unlikable guy himself, working on this invention.
Undaunted by such cynicism and encouraged by the faith of his friends, McCormick persevered. With his only helper, the faithful servant Joe Anderson, he fitted each piece, bit by bit,
This is actually the grandson of Joe Anderson playing Joe here.
The knife blade on which he worked was to be propelled forward through the grain, cutting it with a side-to-side motion. Out of this sliding cutting bar evolved a principle which has since been embodied in all successful harvesting machines.
Well, later on, we could even skip ahead. His son, Harold McCormick, later married into the Rockefeller family. He married Edith Rockefeller, then divorced her to go marry an opera singer of questionable talents named Ganna Walska. Just before the wedding, he checked into a hospital to get a gland operation. Exactly what glands he was getting, basically, it was a theory at the time that if you were getting too old, you could just swap out your testicles. And you were only as old as your glands. There's a bit of controversy as to whose glands he got. There were even rhymes about it going around the city at the time. Officially, it may not have been human. They may have used goat or ape glands. In fact, over the course of his life, he went through the operation twice, and Ganna Walska said it worked a little too well in one of her tell-all books later on. And elsewhere in the plot is Stanley McCormick, his son, came out all right. A couple of the McCormick children came out okay. Not all of them, but some of them. This is him with his mother, Nettie. Stanley spent most of his life in an asylum. His wife, Catherine Dexter McCormick, believed that it wasn't just because his mother was a little unbalanced, shall we say. It was more to do with his endocrine system. But certainly the fact that his mother kept him living at home into his 20s, wouldn't allow him to close the door, etc., probably didn't help. We'll move over. There's more McCormicks to speak of over here. Now, the McCormick brothers are in separate plots. William and Leander are over here in Graceland. Cyrus has this whole wilderness up by the pond. They're not buried in the same plots because they really couldn't stand each other, and that's one case where I think they were right to do so. All of these guys were jerks. They were right to hate each other's guts. But William and Leander particularly thought that it was really their father who invented the Reaper. They should have been getting in on the money themselves. This is William, who stopped going to church because of the abolitionist sermons. His brother Leander was later a good buddy of Robert E. Lee, and his son, Leander Hamilton McCormick, published a book called Characterology and Exact Science, which expanded on the concepts of phrenology, this idea that the shape of your skull determined what kind of a person you were, to include things like skin color. You can probably imagine where the jerk was going with that. His old mansion was until recently Laurie's Steakhouse. They closed and said it was because of Black Lives Matter protests, almost as though his Leander's ghost is still wandering around the place. Now here's an interesting one. One guy who's got his very own cemetery off of Lakeshore Drive. As I've heard, this is the smallest piece of property the federal government owns. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. But rising up above the trees here is the monument and tomb of Stephen Douglas. And actually, you can look right inside of this thing. Let me see. I'm sure I got the picture here. You can walk right in, and there's brochures about this guy on the middle of the sarcophagus. Is that him? Not him. Somewhere I've got a picture. Yeah, inside. Here we go. Inside the tomb, it looks like this. They've got a bust of him. And you can see on the side of the sarcophagus there's actually brochures about him. It's really remarkably tacky, but I'm not losing any sleep over it because this was Stephen Douglas. Dude was a jerk. Senator from Illinois, perhaps most famous today for his debates with Abraham Lincoln. Their big famous 1858 series of debates was really kind of a continuation of something that they'd been doing off and on informally for 4 or 5 years, starting in 1854 at the time, when Douglas had been the guy behind the Kansas-Nebraska bill. That would expand slavery into new territories. That got Lincoln roused from retirement from politics and got back into it, starting by making a big speech. Douglas, to defend it, went out to Chicago to make a speech and was pelted with produce. It was it was portrayed in the press as the abolitionist riot at Chicago. So it is. In the order-loving, law-abiding, abolition-ridden city of Chicago, Illinois' great statesman and representative of the United States Senate was cried down and refused the privilege privilege of speaking. This is the freedom of speech which the minions of sectionalism boast as one of their sacred articles of faith, and which these peculiar political moralists and reformers of all abuses harp upon. In the name of freedom, they have insulted and followed to his home with groans the man who has done more for the halls of... It's like, the groans were freedom of speech, too. Freedom of speech does not mean that nobody's going to come and call you a jerk for it. It's another one. Slavery has now, this is what the Tribune said, slavery has now taken up Stephen A. Douglas because he has stooped lower and eaten more dirt than any man in the North. Let us discard him, abolish the past, look to the future. So he was pelted with produce in Chicago over this. Later on, the Chicago Tribune remembered it as a melee where every man there went home with another man's hat. It's really very fascinating reading the articles about it from 1854. It's very similar to the stuff that you read right now about every time somebody yells at a Supreme Court justice. But at the time, there was a guy by the name of Ike Cook. When he came and made that speech, there were a couple people standing on the platform with him. Later... This was the Chicago Times in 1858, when Douglas went on to have his first big debate with Lincoln. It's hard to figure out who really won the paper with those debates at the time, because newspapers were unabashedly partisan back then. Nowadays, people say things like, back in the old days, they only told you the facts, not the opinions. That's absolute crap. You can see this headline, "The battle fought and won. Lincoln's heart fails him. Lincoln's legs fail him. Lincoln's tongues fail him. Lincoln's arm fails him. Lincoln fails all over. The people refuse to support him. The people laugh at him. Douglas, the champion of the people." This was the Chicago Times, which had been founded originally by a guy named Ike Cook, specifically to promote the work of Senator Douglas. And we'll move over here. Ike Cook is right over here. In the background, you can see you might be able to see just a bit of eternal silence, the statue in the background. Isaac Cook, former postmaster of Chicago. After that speech, E.C. Larned, who was further north at Graceland, gave a big speech against the Nebraska Act. And in response, Ike Cook came and tried to make a speech, was really stumbling all over himself when finally he came up with his best line, the one that would be repeated and said in connection with him for years: "Truth squashed to earth will rise again. You cannot kill it." And that really is a very good line. It's, unfortunately for him, what he was talking about was not the truth. What he was talking about was the idea that expanding slavery in the new territories was a good idea. Major supporter of Senator Douglas at the time was standing right next to him on the platform, trying to answer the hecklers when he was giving that speech in 1854. Now, elsewhere on the platform, I'll just cover briefly, was Eli B. Williams, who has this very prominent marker at Graceland. I never really include him on my tours, though, as prominent as it is as great an example of Victorian funerary art as it is. About the most interesting thing I could find about him was, well, one time when he first came to town, he tried staying at the Sauganash Hotel, but his wife was freaked out by all the shirtless Potawatomi Native Americans hanging around the hotel, so they left. Later on, Louise de Koven Bowen stole all his gooseberries, ate all of them, and got severe diarrhea, which may be his greatest contribution to Chicago, is teaching Louise de Koven Bowen that stealing was wrong. But Isaac Cook was standing right alongside Senator Douglas, promoting the expansion of slavery. A man named Louis Isbell, a black barber in the Sherman House Hotel, later claimed that very day Douglas came in for a haircut, and he chewed him out pretty good. Louis Isbell himself is buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. His grave is unmarked. I've been writing some letters about that one. So later on, Lincoln asked him to recruit men for the soldiers for the Civil War, and he did. He recruited hundreds of black soldiers for the Civil War, but wasn't acting in an official capacity. That role was not officially available to black men at the time. I really think they should still give him a veteran's grave. He tried to get a pension and was unsuccessful. But Ike Cook was the founder of the newspaper The Chicago Times. A few years later, he would get disillusioned with Douglas, mainly because Douglas married a young woman who supposedly thought that hanging out with Ike Cook was beneath their station, so she wouldn't let him hang out with him anymore. And he turned against him completely. Famously at the time, Isaac Cook had a bottle of brandy that he had saved for the occasion on which Senator Douglas would be inaugurated as president. Similarly, I have a bottle of bourbon that is saved for when a particular person dies. But later on, he wrote a letter to the editor saying, I have changed my mind. Douglas will never be president. Come to the post office and we'll all drink the brandy. I think that he might have actually gotten a little bit better over the course of his life. But after his time in Chicago, he moved to St. Louis, just became a wine merchant, got rid of the Chicago Times. For a while there, it was run by our old pal Cyrus McCormick. The late 1850s, early 1860s, he didn't write it himself. He had a guy named E.W. McComas as the political editor who was writing all the editorials, but it was just frothing at the mouth white supremacy. At one point, candidate Abraham Lincoln said something like, I don't want to hear any more nonsense about which race is the superior or inferior race. And E.W. McCormick at McCormick's Chicago Times just went nuts. Nothing that deserves to be repeated. But after they got tired of it, they ended up selling to Wilbur F. Story, who ended up running the Chicago Times as the anti-Lincoln paper in Chicago during the Civil War. At one point during the Civil War, he had one of his reporters was chewed out at the soldiers' home just for being a Chicago Times reporter, and he went into a whole big thing about how the abolitionist element is so intolerant. It's very similar to every time nowadays when somebody punches a Nazi, somebody will say, oh, how tolerant. Wilbur F. Story invented that crap. Later on, he would describe the Emancipation Proclamation as the wickedest and most evil deed in the annals of history. At one point described his speech at Gettysburg as the silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances of an unintelligent man. At one point, his General Burnside shut down his paper, but Lincoln said, nope, freedom of the press, you have to let him keep running, and he responded by writing a parody of the battle cry of freedom that was all about white rights. Later, he lost what marbles he had. This is probably his most famous headline. This wasn't even a Chicago hanging that he talked about being jerked to Jesus. He just liked talking about hangings in those days. But I promised Rose Hill I'd stop dancing on his grave. The gift doesn't appear to be over here. I didn't really ever stop dancing on his grave. Well, let's move up a little. Let's move on back. Yeah, he said annals. Thank you for that, Ann. All right. Also at Graceland, this is when they were doing some landscaping. The Solon Beeman Design Monument to George Pullman. I believe Pullman's out there in the chat today. Once again with his with his silly beard. Now, George Pullman was the founder of the Pullman Palace Car Company, and I actually have kind of a soft spot for this guy. The factory town that he built was way nicer than any other factory town. The wages that he paid were much better than comparable jobs, but he just kind of took it too far. He got a little too paternalistic, started having all these regulations for how his employees should conduct themselves, whether they should drink or not especially, and though he required them to rent their houses from him, one year when he had a bad year, he cut their salaries by about 30% and didn't lower their rents. This led to some massive strikes, and when he died a few years later, it was said that he was buried in this massive concrete slab with cement, steel, and railroad ties surrounding the body. And when we retell this story now, it's usually because they were afraid of his disgruntled employees. At the time, they didn't really talk about that. They talked about some other high-profile grave robbing cases where guys had just been stolen and held for ransom. The Graceland board is kind of divided as to whether that story is entirely true, that he's buried in a giant 10-foot pit full of cement, steel, and railroad ties. Frankly, they're too close to the water for it to be exactly how it would have been described. Well, let's take a quick look at another guy who lived in Pullman's neighborhood and worked in his factories a bit. Somewhere in this section, they couldn't tell me exactly where, or they wouldn't tell me exactly where, but somewhere in this section, probably all by himself, surrounded by mostly people who died 20 years later. He would have had the whole cemetery to himself for a while, but for a while, this was the all-to-himself burial place at Elmwood Park Cemetery of Johann Hock. Now, Johann Hawk, I love talking about this guy and working him in, because the more I talk about him, the more likely it is that eventually there'll be a market for me to write a book about this guy. I might just have to do it anyway and throw it up on Amazon or something. But Hawk, the suave Dr. Jekyll. This was a guy who, by the time they caught up with him, he had already proposed to what they thought would have been wife number 55. Looked like the guy on the Pringles can, talked like a German character on The Simpsons, would meet women through matrimonial ads, marry them, take their money, and run. Now, sometimes this was harder. Sometimes he had a harder time getting the women to sign over their money and property, which was harder than we sometimes think. We tend to think that as soon as you got married, everything became the guy's property. It wasn't necessarily. It kind of depended on jurisdiction. I get in trouble saying that. If I mention women having bank accounts before 1974, some people are really invested in the notion that that was completely illegal at the time. But Hawk, by the time they caught up with him, he had already proposed to what might have been wife number 55. He seems to have killed about a third of them. He would represent himself as a Dr. Jekyll, then become Mr. Hyde. Now, as they were investigating him, they found one house had a trunk full of magic equipment and a certificate from a hypnotism course he had taken. Newspapers were absolutely thrilled by this story. They started having stories that, okay, that's how this guy who looks like the guy on the Pringles can was able to seduce and marry so many women. He must have had a magic zither. And there were people who talked about him playing the zither. Maybe he was hypnotizing them with it. That would not really work. And yeah, people talked about it. There was also Belle Gunness was working the same scam on matrimonial ads at the same time. Even back then, there were police chiefs saying, man, what if they had answered each other's ads? What if it had been this game of wits where they're trying to poison each other? It would have been quite a black comedy, kind of an Arsenic and Old Lace sort of vibe. I've been thinking about writing it for some time. But this was a house still standing in Pullman today. This is actually where Johann Hawk lived for a while. He worked as a machinist in the Pullman shops off and on, and actually had a place here with one of his wives who survived. He got her money, but survived. Let's move on over a little bit. Back over to Mount Carmel Cemetery, where most of the gangsters are. But gangsters are a whole tour to themselves. Let's take a quick look at Elbridge Curran here. Elbridge Curran was a police officer. This is probably not the most flattering picture of him that they could have gotten. But at one point, he was sitting in his office and then came running in saying, a gangster just came and shot my desk, then he disappeared down into the freight tunnels. The police spent days digging around in the old freight tunnels, the 60-mile network of tunnels for pushing coal and mail around down underneath the city, 40 feet below the loop, full of places for people to hide. They even had a name of who the guy they thought probably was that was hiding down there, spent countless man-hours on this. But then, a couple of days into it, Officer Curran came running into the office again saying, another gangster just came and shot my car. And under questioning, he admitted that he had made the whole thing up. He had shot his own car. He had shot his own desk. The whole thing was really just a publicity stunt for which he was given a 30-day suspension. Now, there were other things where, over and over again, this guy narrowly escaped from fires. When it came out that he was making this other stuff up, it kind of makes you wonder how these blazes actually started. Officer, famed for his hoaxes, suffers burns. And while we're bopping around, we'll go back to Rose Hill for a minute. See, we've had our share of amusing mayors in Chicago, we could say that. Levy Boone came to Chicago as a doctor and was actually a fierce advocate for getting better treatment and better options for cholera, better cholera hospital built. But later on, he would make a big thing out of saying that really the reason we have so much cholera is all these immigrants coming in. He was elected mayor in 1854 as a member of the Know Nothing Party, or 1855. He had previously been a partner of Dr. Charles Volney Dyer, who was like the president of the Underground Railroad. But as mayor of the Know Nothing Party, the Know Nothing Party was a group, after Douglas introduced the Kansas-Nebraska bill, both the Whig Party and the Democratic Party were both completely split. They started realigning over the next couple of years. The 1854 election, there were lots of people running as new parties and third-party candidates. One of those was the Know Nothings, which wouldn't really say what they were into. It was a mixture of Democrats and Whigs, but the big thing that everybody knew was that they were very anti-immigrant. They were called the Know Nothings because when asked what their party platform was, they were supposed to just say, "I know nothing." They didn't last very long, but we did manage to elect a mayor of them in Chicago. His first act was to shut down all the German beer halls on Sunday, which led to some nasty riots. And he's not alone as the bad mayors here. There's an unmarked grave, mercifully unmarked nearby, for our second mayor, Buckner Stith Morris, who is in the Oxford English Dictionary as the first person known to have uttered the phrase, "hell in a handbasket." It was where he was planning to send the abolitionists. There was a group called the Sons of Liberty, formerly the Knights of the Golden Circle, who had been prodding like a Confederate takeover since before the Confederacy even existed. And, you know, these groups always have to call themselves groups like the Sons of Liberty or the Patriot Front, or constantly calling themselves We the People and all of that crap. Buckner Stith Morris appeared at a meeting. Hell in a handbasket is where he planned to send all the abolitionists by breaking people out of Camp Douglas. He was eventually put on trial for treason. He was acquitted because they decided whenever he had to do something that was actually treasonous, he would have his wife do it instead. But this was the time of Reconstruction when everybody was just wanting to kind of move on. Really, he was acquitted, but frankly, this dude was guilty. I do have the video dancing on him. It's a Charlie Brown dance. Over at Calvary Cemetery, not exactly a mayor, but about as powerful as one, Bathhouse John Coughlin. First ward alderman, along with Hinky Dink Kenna, back when we had 2 aldermans per ward. Bathhouse John got a lot of criminals off the hook, but also was kind of such a goofball. This is him getting ready for Straw Hat Day, practicing putting on his straw hat like a big boy. In the early 20th century, before his death, he was kind of, on the one hand, thought of as an elder statesman and partly thought of really as a joke by the other aldermen and the rest of the city officials. So they would let him promote things like a contest to find the first robin of spring, promoting Straw Hat Day, things like that. It was better than letting him talk about his songs. He used to write songs called things like "She Sleeps by the Side of the Drainage Canal," "Why'd They Make Lake Michigan So Wide, So Awful Wide," "Ode to a Bathtub," that was a good one, "Ode to a Bowl of Soup." It was later said that a newspaper reporter was writing all of the songs for him, which may very well have been true, but it's a 1950s newspaper reporter memoir. They were claiming to have made up pretty much everything. If I ever find a newspaper reporter memoir from the 1950s that claims that Calvin Coolidge didn't exist, he was just something we newspaper men made up, I would honestly not be that surprised. But of course, perhaps the goofiest of them all, back at Oakwood Cemetery, the Thompson plot. Just a week or so ago, we were walking around here. I found Van H. Higgins was right nearby him, the judge from the Lavinia Lane case. He was also a jerk. I don't think I got that filmed in time. Well, this is his father, Big Bill of the best mustache. Well, his father's behind him, I guess. But his father, Big Bill Thompson Sr., you just can't beat that facial hair. You can't. But this is Big Bill himself, who was mayor of Chicago in the 1920s. Sometimes Al Capone is said to have had a portrait of Big Bill in his office. He was known as a very friendly to the gangster kind of guy. Really, he was just such a goofball. At one point during the election, he invited the press to come to a debate between him and his opponents, but it was only him and a couple of rats in cages labeled with the names of his opponents. That kind of stunt. Later on, he made a big part of his platform for re-election anti-British sentiment. He was going to go ban every book in the library that was too pro-British, promised to punch the King of England in the snoot if he got the chance. The idea being that this would endear him to the Irish citizens. Thompson take rodents on stage. But then he was finally voted out of office in 1931 in favor of Anton Cermak. Here's the Chicago Tribune was a Republican paper. He was a Republican mayor, our last Republican mayor. But I just can't really top the Chicago Tribune's goodbye to him. Scroll up a bit. William Hale Thompson was defeated Tuesday after a campaign which he alone made disgraceful. The election was an ejection, a dirty job, but Chicago has washed itself and put on clean clothes. Thompson recognized the Tribune as his chief enemy. The Tribune was glad to earn that opinion. It has taken the fight to him on every occasion during this long and depraved course of his administration. It is unpleasant business to eject a skunk, but someone has to do it. For Chicago, Thompson has meant filth, corruption, obscenity, idiocy, and bankruptcy. He has given the city an international reputation for moronic buffoonery, barbaric crime, triumphant hoodlumism, unchecked graft, and a dejected citizenship. He nearly ruined the property and completely destroyed the pride of the city. He made Chicago a byword for the collapse of American civilization. In his attempt to continue he excelled himself as a liar and defamer of character. He's out. He is not only out, but he is dishonored. He is deserted by his friends. He is permanently marked by the evidence of his character and conduct. His health is impaired by his ways of life, and he leaves office and goes from the city the most accredited man who ever held place in it. I always feel like we need a cigarette after reading that. Again, we can apply this to any number of different politicians, of course. But all right, everybody. That's it for this particular impromptu tour. We got plenty of upcoming stuff coming up. August 4th, our next virtual tour will be about Uptown Tales. Whoa, Uptown Tales. Followed on August 7th, our next in-person one will be Architecture of Mysterious Chicago. There's going to be a lot of Patreon people there. It's going to be particularly a good one for the Patreon crowd. Let me put that up there. Over on the Patreon, you can get you really get your money's worth on the Patreon. You get up to 4 emails a week of cool Chicago history stuff. Plus, on the ticket tier, you get free tickets to walking tours once a month. Next walking tour after that is on August 14th. It is the official release launch of the Graceland Cemetery book, which is officially out August 9th. So we're going to be doing 2 tours at Graceland Cemetery, one at 10 o'clock that's about sold out, and one at 1 o'clock that has quite a few more people coming in. Officially, it's like 9:30, 12:30, so I'll do a little talk that you don't even need a ticket for just at the beginning. Then we've also got Mystericon coming up. There are tickets on sale now, not only for an October 1st Graceland afternoon tour, but on Friday, September 30th, we are doing the Chicago Boat Cruise. I will be running the architectural boat tour off of the Summer of George. That's at 6:30 and 8:30 p.m. Do swing by. There's a few tickets left for the 6:30 and a lot left for the 8:30 so far. There's still a couple of months to go. That will be all a part of Mystericon 2022, our second annual gathering. Now, should you need a Mystericon t-shirt or a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago has everything you need there. That seems to have disappeared in this. Once again, I haven't done this particular tour in about 2 years, so a lot of the stuff is gone. But yeah, should you need one of these sweatshirts, hoodies, etc., like these fine Georgia voters, go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. They've got everything you need right there, including the new Mystericon 2022 outfits. And with that, everybody, we will put the Benny Goodman back on and hang out like we always do. Thanks for joining me for this Sunday morning tour. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'll be on the Rick Cogan Show on WGN Radio today at 5 o'clock. I hope you all tune in. Here we go. Benny.
Now, Benny Goodman's arrangement of the Bugle Call Rang.
Thanks, anonymous Facebook user. Thanks, Kathy. Is there a name tag contest for Mystericon 2022? I didn't know about that. But it's due today. Yeah, Casey, there is a gangster grave tour as well. That's why I don't have too many of them on this one. They're a whole other tour. I did do a radio show with Hulk Hogan once, Susan. But no, Rick Cogan. Casey, it'll be a separate time. Maybe I'll do that one next weekend, the gangster one. It's about time I ran another gangster tour. I could run one of the Loop in a couple of weeks too, I suppose. But we're just getting about to that fate I'm getting about that time when we do listen to more than one tour a week. Oh yeah, we'll get Miles up here in a minute. Miles is still over on the new chair. Thanks, Casey. If you're on AdamChicago.com, there's a mailing list where I try to keep people updated to these things. We do mini tours of just about every morning, and full-length ones once or twice a week. When is Taylor Street in person? I should do that one again pretty soon. Adam, ho ho ho, 7:20 a.m. on your radio dial. Yep, that's a Ram Man. Yeah, there are a lot of gangster tours in this city, but they're of varying quality, and even the really good ones tend not to be accurate, per se. Let's just say that. If you get a good guide, the Untouchable tour is a blast, but not... You know, great jokes, great stories. The stories are kind of iffy. Kathleen, we're actually in the post-show hangout right now, but if you wait until we're done, over on the video section of Mysterious Chicago, everything will be posted like 5 minutes after we're done. Seen a lot of new faces out there today. Welcome, everybody. Check out on Facebook, there's also a group called Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club. That's a good time to grab Miles. Miles, you're actually out with you to make your appearance here. This is Miles. Miles, you can see down in the logo in the corner there. Miles is kind of sleepy today. Me and Priya both just love the new chair. Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
That's what I should tell the IRS, that I'm a cult leader, right? Kristen, the green chair is from eBay, but you can also get it on like Wayfair, Amazon, Home Depot, just about everybody that sells furniture online. Look up the easiest thing is to call it a fruit green mid-century chair, but there's a lot of different colors available. So, pretty good bargain. Oh, hey, Miles. I'm not sure where Priya is right now. She's probably cuddling with Ronnie. We just got, well, here, I'll show you guys the whole setup. As we've been redoing the living room, just added this table next to it, but I don't really like the table that much yet. It kind of looks like a garbage can to me. But it's really intended more as a charging station. Not yet. I'm not loving it yet. There's a cool teardrop-shaped table at IKEA, but it's shaped the wrong direction. It's to go on the other side of a couch. Our place is really a 1920s apartment, but Art Deco stuff is harder to find. And I gotta figure, most mid-century places, they probably still had most of their Art Deco stuff. It's not like people bought all new places and all new furniture all through the 50s. Okay, see, I think there's a lot of places they ought to start taxing. Octavio, you got it for the 10 a.m. Right now, it looks like a lot more people coming on the morning one than the afternoon.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
I'm just looking at, I've got one of the articles from 1854 up in another window. I can only read like the bottom 2 lines. Our neighbor of the Guardian also attempts to patch up the concern, but before he gets through, diffs into hell feet foremost. A pretty kettle of fish this abolition concern was and is. Huh. I had to read the rest of that, figure out what was going on. Heather pretty soon. I just added, there's not a link on Facebook yet, it's kind of a secret one. But the October 1st Graceland tour is up on adamchicago.com. It's on Eventbrite. This thing's a bit smaller. I don't know if anybody's ever actually used those QR codes. I really don't. That's nice. Oh yeah, this is the thing on Tuesday's mini tour. I'm actually planning ahead a little bit. There's a guy who has set up, those little free libraries for books. He set one up for Star Wars action figures. I am thrilled by this. What a great idea. What a great city this is to have a Star Wars action figure free library. So I'll throw in some additions to that. I think Octavio is going to as well. And I'll show it off on the mini tour on Tuesday. Tomorrow is Mural Monday. Oh yeah, the bat stay for sure. Oh, here's Priya. Hopping onto the couch. The cats are loving the new living room setup. Is the lamp broken? No, the lamp kind of looks like it's broken, I imagine, because it's reflecting in the TV. There we go. Hey, Batches. Yeah, the Banksy stays for now. I looked at some Gertrude Abercrombies, but I would want one that goes as well with the bats as the Balloon Girl. But from here on out, it's going to be like a matter of whether I remember to tilt the TV so it doesn't get the reflection of the lamp. There goes Priya. Ronnie's up. Priya's on the move.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Oh, Kristen, that's cool. Oh, hey, back to Rufus. Eating a baby lizard? Betsy, I haven't checked. I don't know if I've gotten an email yet, but I'm sure you're good to go. Yeah, I just see it now. There it is. Yep, you're fine. What am I going to watch on TV this afternoon? I'm watching Roy's World, the movie that directed by the other guy who's going to be on the Rick Kogan show and produced by Michael Glover Smith, my good friend. I know on the 2nd, on Tuesday, there are new Beavis and Butthead episodes. A whole new season of Beavis and Butthead on Paramount+. So yeah, I went to see Green Day in a club this week. There's new episodes of Beavis and Butthead coming out. It's this year. Like one of those, the year is 1996. You don't know it, but things will never get better than this. Like, yeah, they will. I don't have any algebra homework right now. Laura, the Green Day concert was awesome. They played, songs that they hadn't played in 20 years. And a few of them they've only played like once or twice in the last decade. Like 5 songs from before Dookie. I mean, Church on Sunday, One of My Lies, Disappearing Boy, Christie Road, one of my favorites. These days mostly they play stadium shows, and they have a pretty static set list for them with a big light show and everything. This, they just came out and played. Just like when I saw him in 1995, really. Except for some newer material. It was really cool to get to see. And my feet hurt from pogoing so much. Now, I knew at the time that quite a few of these would be, songs that I bet they don't play that one very often. There's certainly not all of these in the same show. Then it turned out 2 of the songs hadn't been played in over 20 years. A couple others were in like the once-a-decade rotation. The Green Day message boards are just freaking out about it. So I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I recognized at least somewhat how rare this stuff was. I didn't realize they didn't do many club shows. I've still never seen them in a stadium setting with the big light shows or anything that they've been doing the last 10 or 15 years. Yes, Diane, I did get that one. And I don't know who. I haven't really dived into trying to come up with theories on early murders yet. I'm just enjoying watching it. But I feel like Mabel's girlfriend is too obvious a suspect. Lily is just... Lily's got to be tied in somehow, but she also seems too obvious.
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress.
When is Springfield concert? I don't know. Oh, Springsteen. That's not till March. Before that, I've got Gaslight Anthem in September, Maisie Peters in November, I think. Yeah, Tom, I'd love to see their big stadium show. I'm sure it's a great show. I've only ever seen him in small places. Rewind the Benny a bit. But getting to see him do Christie Road in a small venue, not to mention Burnout and Chump, a couple of my favorite Dookie tracks. Luckily, I couldn't get a ticket myself, but luckily Layla got an extra. I didn't realize, I figured they probably did the occasional club show like this. Really, it's pretty unusual for them.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking, and here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Well, Kristen, I'm not going to have this rated. You got to do a lot of paperwork to run a club like that. Well, Tommy, the fireplace has been here the whole time. You know, I was just noticing in the Luke Vader duel in Jedi how often Luke gets the high ground. Alright, see you, anonymous Facebook user. I don't know who's coming in on that, who has to jet. It just comes up as Facebook user on my chat window here. Alright, everybody, I am getting hungry for lunch myself, so I'll throw another quick plug. WGN Radio at 5 o'clock today will be on The Rick Kogan Show. That should be a great time. I'm really looking forward to that one. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. One more quick plug for the upcoming tours. Thursday night, come back here for Uptown Tales. August 7th, a week from today, Architecture of Mysterious Chicago, and August 14th, Graceland Cemetery Tour / book launch. 2 of those, one of which will be live streamed, I hope. I've mentioned that it will, so it better be. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe stay strong, and if you can, of course, ladies and gentlemen, you gotta stay spooky. Thanks a lot, everybody.